North Carolina, and we're on Facebook Live, and then I'm also doing YouTube Live, and just kind of hoping that works out, because with the setup I have right now, you can't be too sure with just the fact that I'm going to two places at one time. As far as online, there's no guarantee of I can't see like where I'm going. So I mean, as far as like those two locations, so you just kind of hope it works when it starts. Anyway, I hope you guys are having a good morning. Today's verse is a verse that one of the best ones ever, I think. Well, for me, because it seems like I refer to this verse a lot, and maybe you do too, when you're talking about becoming a Christian, when you're talking about the life of Christ living, or Jesus living in you. And that verse is Romans 12, 1 and 2, but today's verse of the day is verse 2. Be no longer conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, which is your reasonable act of service. So hey, love this verse. I think because, number one, it really does embody who we are as Christians, who you are. That the fact that, you know, as a Christian, regardless of how long you've been a Christian, whether it's been a week, whether it's been 30, 40, 50 years, the bottom line is you are being changed. You are constantly being renewed, and you're constantly learning and growing, and it's an incredible lifestyle to be in that lane when it comes to living our life for Christ. One of my favorite things to think about is the fact that when it says be transformed, that is a metamorphosis. That is something becoming something different, and it's our minds. And I know that, like, as Jesus, we talked about this just a little bit yesterday, as Jesus began talking to people back in his time who were under the differentiate between I love it where he says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. This is so important for you and me to remember this today, especially when we're talking to people in younger generations, to make sure how we feel at the moment. That, yes, we do want a heart change. There's no doubt about that. But it's our mind, and our mind, and therefore, has to be transformed, has to be renewed, rewired, so to speak, rewired. And when it comes to being rewired, redone, reborn, it's a whole new deal. It's like in where I work at, we're changing over the past few years. We've changed out all the old like incandescent lights and lighting fixtures for like brand new, like LED, brand new, like. Rewire them in, and it's a whole different ballgame. Everything looks completely different under those new lights. And that's what happens when your mind becomes renewed. See, it's as you've been a Christian a while, you've gotten used to thinking differently than the world. But if for a moment, if we could sit down and say, okay, what if, let's go back and let's remember what it's like to think like a worldly person. To think like a worldly person means that my life is dependent on me, and my life and what I do is dependent on my talents, my entrepreneurship, my zeal, my goodness, my time, and so therefore, if my life is based on that, then all that is mine. and I control it, and I'm important, and I have to do what's best for me. That is the basis for the pattern of this world. The pattern of this world, another one, is that the pattern of this world is one of the big ones is we're all inherently good, and if you are good, then you'll be rewarded. But if you're not good, you may or may not be punished. And you can be bad and do bad things if you have your own reasons. That's the pattern of this world. Another pattern of this world is to get angry at a person who's in the wrong lane and is now blocking traffic. That's because that's happening right in front of me. Another pattern of this world is that, especially right now, this is where you and I really come in when it comes to younger folks these days. A pattern of this world is I have to be, my thinking needs to be in line with the majority because the majority is right. So, and that majority, that thinking of the majority shifts and changes all the time. And so younger people, especially in college and stuff, you're going to find them more as far as like liberal thinking and the thought of the thinking that what I believe about this doesn't necessarily have to match up. Like, you don't have to think ahead, so to speak. So like this is that I'm not talking political. I'm talking about the fact that I make my own choices. I do what I want to do, and if you don't agree with that, then it's a personal attack against me. That's part of the pattern of the thinking of our world. Now, that's not necessarily in other countries or other situations, but in our society, in our Western culture, in our culture right now, one of the big patterns of the world is that if you tell me that Jesus is the only way to God, then what you're doing to me is you are putting me down. You are offending me, and I don't have the right to offend you by telling you that there's only one way to God. And that is our default. As a Christian, my thinking is really pretty much the opposite of all of those thoughts that we just talked about as far as the patterns of this world. See, when I'm transformed, I no longer think like that. Now, it's not that I won't be tempted to think in that way, or not that at times we might not get caught up in those things in the way that the world is thinking. But the bottom line is that we are being transformed and renewed. And you'll hear people say things who aren't Christians, and as a believer with a renewed mind, the things that they're talking about make no sense. It makes no sense why they're so angry. It makes no sense why they're so mad or depressed, or because somebody offended them or whatever. And it just doesn't make any sense. And the reason it doesn't is because we're thinking on a whole different plane, dimension. It's not about being smarter. It's just taking on the mind of Christ, as the Bible tells us to do. That transformation that took place, that metamorphosis in our synapse that takes place as far as the way in which we think, not just what we think about, but the way in which we think, is going to be very different for you. And there are times that maybe you've been in this situation where you're with a group of people and you have the way you're thinking about the situation, and it's very, very different than everyone else. Maybe they're not Christians. Maybe they're not like disciple-making Christians. Maybe they're just like people who maybe go to church. You know, there's a difference between people who go to church and Christians. So there's a difference there in the way that they're thinking. Kind of blows you away. It's like, am I wrong? Because and so what happens is sometimes we think, well, I really think differently than most people. Maybe there's something wrong with me. No. If you are taking on the mind of Christ, you are in the minority. You're in the minority as far as the way people think, the way people talk. Have you ever experienced worldliness like just come flying down into the church? You know, where like your thinking is priority one, knowing God, being known by God. Priority two, reaching people for Jesus, right? And you just go with that. That's your thing. That's your motto. That's your mission. That's how you live. That's how you think every single day. And so you're in this group of people in your church. Maybe you're in a meeting somewhere, and they're talking about, I don't know, whatever, a ministry or something. And all of a sudden people get like upset and mad about having to change this or do things that way, or they're trying to make people happy. Like, you know, where people, as soon as you start getting into conversation, well, if we try to reach people that way, it might upset some people, and then people get upset about being upset, and people can actually be angry and mad and hostile. And all of a sudden you're thinking, wait a minute, what's going on here? And you see that worldliness, that cloud of worldliness, and I have seen it so many times in churches where it's just so worldly. You wonder, like, how can this even be called like a church? Because it's not the way that you think. The way that you think is love God first, love other people. After that, everything else is secondary. And so you'll see that oftentimes when it comes to Christians getting together and talking about ministry or how we're going to do something, you know. So look, I want you to know something. If you are taking on the mind of Christ, if your mind is being transformed, then you will be in the minority of the way in which you think, right? And when you get used to that, oftentimes you can take it for granted because you think people are making the dumbest choices around you. But we all have to remember that without Christ, you and I would be making dumb choices a lot and doing the wrong thing and not understanding, you know, spirituality and stuff like that. Without Christ, that's where you and I would be. So praise God that we have that renewed mind. Therefore, we can't judge others who don't have it. We just have to like love them and keep moving on. And so I want to encourage you with that. It might be today, at some point, even this week, if you are with any group of people, and especially if you're around people who are not Christian, which is very likely, you're going to think differently. You have different opinions. And so there is something, the last thing I want you to think about, because I've been thinking about this for like a while. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. It's a concept, a spiritual concept brought to us from Brant Hansen. He's the guy who wrote the book Blessed Are the Misfits, which is one of my favorite books of all time. And then he wrote another book after that called Unoffendable. His thesis, after going through the scriptures and doing a lot of research and all those kind of things that people do when they write a book, his thesis is that as a believer, we should never, ever be offended. That we should never, ever be offended. And so I began to think about that and ask myself, is that true? Should we never be offended? And so, is that a part of the renewal of our minds, is never being offended? Because if I'm becoming like Christ, there were times where he seemed to be kind of angry, I guess you would say. or upset, but he never seemed personally offended. He never took things personally. And I think I think it may be true that if I find myself personally being offended, not that I'm not, I mean, you get upset about things. I'm not talking about anger. I'm not talking about emotions. I'm talking about offended in that, because his thing is like, I don't have any rights as a believer anymore. I gave all my rights up to Christ. So therefore, I'm his. So therefore, since I've given up all my rights, there's no reason to be offended at anyone or anything, because it's not my right to be offended. Only Christ has the right to find offensive things from this sinful world. It's just a thought, something to think about. And Brant Hansen, he about that. Anyway, thinking about that. So anyway, that's just a little taste of that verse. Be no longer be no longer conformed, right? No longer put yourself in the mold of this world, but be transformed. And the transformation, we talked about this, we talk about it a lot. It's the last thing that we'll talk about this morning. And if you and I were sitting together this morning, the question would be, how can you and I remind ourselves and remind others that transformation is not from the outside to the inside, it's from the inside to the outside. The worldly what did my sound just go? Oh, okay. Oftentimes what they will try to point out is that that Christians are supposed to look a certain way, act a certain way, dress a certain way, use a certain type of language, read a certain version of the scriptures, and so they have this mold that they say this is what a believer is, and if you don't fit that mold, right? If you don't fit that mold, then I'm angry at you, or I'm offended at you, or you don't belong here. And how sad is that? Because a churchgoer who thinks in those terms, along those lines, and judges other Christians based on whatever, on anything, they're not following this verse. That's a pattern of the world. Can't judge people, not even Christians. I can notice, I can definitely notice a person, how they love people. That's a telltale sign. That's what John says. You'll know them by their love. And we'll also know them by the fruits that they bear. But I don't judge them on the things that they do wrong. You see, we don't judge a Christian. We don't encourage Christians. We don't, as a Christian, looking at the negative side of other Christians. The Bible doesn't, we don't do that. What we do is we know other people are Christians by the love that they have, the type of love that they have. And so that's a part of the transformation of our mind, the way that we love people. We can tell that in other people. And then we can tell if people are truly have joy in their life, if they truly have patience in their life, if they have long suffering, if they have faith. We can see those things. So I know a person's a Christian because of those things, but I don't judge that Christian because of maybe the way that they've messed up, or the way that they dress, or maybe sometimes the language. That's another way in which we are constantly in a metamorphosis in the way that we think. And you cannot base your Christian faith and your Christian walk in comparison to any other person, believer or non-believer. To compare and you contrast yourself with someone else is a pattern of the world. You need only to compare and contrast yourself with Jesus Christ himself. That is part of the renewal of your mind. So maybe you're thinking, well, I'm not a spiritualist so-and-so. No, you are. If they're a believer and you're a believer, your spiritualness, so to speak, is the same, because you have the Holy Spirit, God, in you, and that there's no more or less of that. Maybe what you mean is that maybe they have more emotion than you do in certain situations. Maybe that's it, and that could be true. They could be more emotional than you. But the truth is that you're just as spiritual, you're just as gifted, you're just as important as any other person in this world to God when it comes to God. So don't ever kick yourself or feel down on yourself because you're not as spiritual as someone else. The bottom line is that we're all made co-heirs, joint heirs with Jesus. So we're all the same as far as the giftedness that God has given us as far as his Spirit goes, because he gave us his Spirit, not a portion of it. So that's another pattern of this world. The pattern of the world is to always contrast, compare yourself to others. And sometimes you'll see that the church, as the church compares and contrasts itself with other churches, the bottom line is we need not do that. We only have to be concerned about our comparison to Jesus Christ himself. So again, man, we could go on and on, couldn't we? But I got to go in. I got to go to work. I know you guys got to go. So listen, hope you have a good one, and we'll talk to you soon.